My friends, as part of the movement army's operation to capture Istanbul, Yıldız Palace was also brought under control on the same day. This operation involved not only the regular army but also volunteer units, composed of Jewish, Armenian, and Christian militants. So much so that a notorious Turkish murderer, who had spent his life fighting against the Ottoman army, and burning and destroying Turkish villages in the Balkans, and Sandanski, the terrorist Bulgarian committee member who was a partner in freedom of the Unionists, were at the very forefront of the Yildiz raid alongside his gang. Look, Mustafa Kemal said in a speech he gave in Parliament in 1921, I, too, was among those who entered Istanbul with the advancing army during the March 31st incident, perhaps even at its head. We finally entered. We shed much blood. We hanged many people. We insisted, you must implement this book. We received the reply, let's implement it immediately. Then, the interesting part is that Masonic Grand Master Celil Laiktez had openly admitted that it was the Freemasons themselves who deposed Sultan Abdulhamid and that they had personally organized and directed that staff committee, which included Mustafa Kemal and the expeditionary force. Look, with this raid, the palace was left completely open to looting for several days. The palace's most valuable horses and rare animals were stolen by bandits. Those who entered looted whatever they found, vases, jewelry, curtains. The scale of the looting was not limited to the palace walls alone. Newspapers of the time reported on their front pages that some valuable items looted from Yildiz had been smuggled abroad, sold at exorbitant prices at an auction in Paris, and that rare manuscripts, taken from the Yıldız Library, had even made their way to America. Look, the looters had destroyed every archival document that might incriminate them in the future by burning them. All, he wrote. Indeed, Hüseyin Yalçın, a Unionist journalist, described in his memoirs how the archive was looted. Everyone was taking something. What was I supposed to do? I went into the archive section. I found a document related to myself. I took it. On page 18 of Volume 9 of the Turkish Historical Society's publication, it is stated, with whom did these Unionists collaborate? Not with ordinary, law-abiding Armenian citizens, but with the Armenian Dashnak terrorist organization, with the Armenian Hinchak terrorist organization, the Egyptian Jewish Society, the Jewish organizations that would go on to establish Israel, which today makes Palestinians bleed, the Ottoman Covenant Society, Sharif Hussein's group, and Jamal al-Din al-Afghani and Rashid Rida, a separate association. I've forgotten them now. You'll see all of these, the Hayren Society, the Balkan Revolutionary organizations based in America, my friends. The 1919 issue of the İkam Newspaper, while reporting on the police investigation into this looting, had listed in detail not only the names of those who looted the Yıldız Palace, but also exactly what they had seized from the palace. Look, this list is truly fascinating. Indeed, the individuals named here would later be hailed as heroes. For example, according to the newspaper, while Mahmut Şevket Pasha, commander of the movement army, was looting crowns, rings, gold, and grills, Commander Hüsnü Pasha allegedly seized a necklace, while Enver Pasha, Cemal Pasha, and Damat İsmail Hakkı Bey allegedly seized very valuable furniture, vases, diamonds, and various jewels. And it was alleged that Mustafa Kemal, one of the army commanders, had seized a diamond and pearl necklace, while Major Sami Bey had seized a crown worth 3 million lira. It was also noted that many other valuable items, not recorded in the official accounts, had been stolen by the looters. In fact, in a subsequent report by the İkam Newspaper, it was stated that Abdulhamid's personal seal had also been taken and used to conduct certain transactions, to such an extent that Hüseyin Yalçın, the Unionist journalist who was found to have looted a watch and a suit during the Star looting, admitted in his memoirs that perhaps only a few isolated instances of ordinary theft might have occurred. He had confessed to the looting, saying, "This too must have been crammed into a very short time." Let's continue. So what was left behind? The Sultan's home. There were his wives' belongings, their jewels. They looted everything. This looting was brought to court in 1919, and it was determined exactly who stole what. There are names here that I cannot mention here as it would violate the law, Some of the jewels were sold at auctions in Europe. Look, these items were sold in Europe under the name Hamis diamonds, which was his personal property. They even forcibly took the emerald ring Sultan Abdulhamid had given me, my ruby earrings, and the silver necklace my father had given me. They threw us out without even allowing us to take our personal belongings. Look, Sultan Abdulhamid's daughter, Aishi Osmanolu, said, "This. Everything of value, whether light or heavy, had been looted. Night after night, trunks and belongings were carried out of the palace until dawn. The palace had been reduced to a state of utter chaos. They were simply taking the servants out after subjecting them to searches. Some had managed to escape only by scattering the money and diamonds they'd saved up over the years, earned through hard work, here and there out of fear. My poor brother, however, said, I'd rather die than give the Sultan's belongings to you. He had sealed my mother's apartment. Play the Macedonian national anthem. Macedonians, play the Macedonian national anthem right now. Listen closely. Among their few heroes, you'll hear the name Sandanski, the Unionists, who had co-opted Sandanski into their ranks, launched the March 31st uprising, in which, alongside Jews and Armenians, Greeks and Ottoman soldiers who, like today's Abdullah Öcalan, fought against the Ottoman Empire in the Balkan Mountains to establish a state, and with this individual, who is notorious for brutally killing Ottoman soldiers, they staged a coup and celebrated at Yıldız Palace. My friends, Hüsamettin Ertürk, the last head of the Teşkilat Mahsusa, considered the forerunner of the MIT, says the following. The Unionists marked the official beginning of the new era with a shower of stars. During his 33-year reign, Abdulhamid had carefully and meticulously stored in Yıldız Palace a vast fortune, thousands of jewels and gold and silver sets sent to him as gifts from all over, dazzling the eyes with their myriad colors and varieties, including diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and more. These were looted. It remains unclear who took what. The value of this treasure, exceeding millions, is the subject of much discussion. The late Sultan Abdulhamid had said at his villa in Thessaloniki, my friend Debreli Zunina, unfortunately, the Unionists, would have at least informed the Chamber of Deputies about this great treasure. They did not even do that, and they draped a veil of rebellion over this immense fortune. In reality, however, it was not just the jewels that were looted. The palace's velvet and silk curtains, dazzling chandeliers, carpets, mother-of-pearl panels, intricately carved doors, gold vases, and silver candlesticks and braziers, as well as chairs, sofas, beds, quilts, and pillows, silver kitchenware, and collections of spoons and forks were all plundered by the bands of loyalists, aside from the army of the movement that claimed to be ushering in a new era for the country. On the other hand, the palace staff, aides de camp, chamberlains, and hundreds of people who made their living from the palace, men and women alike, had also fled, stuffing everything they could get their hands on into their pockets. The saddest part of it all was that Abdulhamid's beloved daughter, Aisha Sultan, was rushed out of the palace with just a few changes of clothes and brought to Sirkeci, and from there they were sent to Selanik in a dark, unlit train car. On the way, the deposed Sultan and his daughter, given nothing but water, were forced to reside in a mansion in Thessaloniki with empty rooms that hadn't been used in a long time, a place that evoked sorrow above all. Else, on many cold nights, Sultan Abdulhamid would try to keep warm by draping one of the mansion's velvet curtains over his blanket. Truly, sometimes one is at a loss for words. This is a tragic event for anyone it happens to. Yıldız Palace is the Sultan's home. One part is where the state is governed. Another part is the Sultan's residence. Bandits who came with the invading army, including Bulgarian bandits of every kind, stormed the palace. They separated the Sultan from his family. They put him in a car with just his two daughters, 2 sons, 1 son, and 2 wives. Without allowing them to take any belongings, they took them straight to Thessaloniki and imprisoned them in the home of a Jewish banker. This is also interesting. Are you the one refusing to give Palestine to the Zionists? We'll lock you up in a Jewish banker's house, Thessaloniki. Such a thing has never been seen in history. This is a major scandal. My friends, with the loss of the war in October 1918, the allegations of that star-studded looting, which had been discussed behind closed doors for years, exploded onto the front pages like a bomb. Although the Damat Ferret government issued an arrest warrant for the perpetrators of the Star Rain incident during the armistice period, some of the Unionists had already died, while others had boarded German ships and fled the country long ago. Those who remained denied these serious charges with a typical defensive reflex. Cengiz Ozakuncu also presents Mustafa Kemal's denial of the report in the İkam Newspaper and the fact that his name was not mentioned in this case as definitive proof of innocence. However, he overlooks a very critical chronology here. Note that the date the İkam Newspaper published the police investigation was April 17, 1919, Mustafa Kemal. Pasha's departure for Samsun, however, was on May 19, 1919. In other words, on April 17, 1919, Mustafa Kemal was a high-ranking staff officer at the Ministry of War awaiting an assignment to Anatolia, and at the same time as the official aide-de-camp to Sultan Vahdettin had already emerged as the strongest potential leader in the country following the flight of his greatest rival, Enver Pasha. Now, one must ask rationally, having finally secured the opportunity he had been waiting for years, Mustafa Kemal was hardly going to go out and say, "Yes, I also received these items during the Star Reign." He wouldn't turn himself in, would he? Naturally, he too would issue a denial to clear his name, just like the others. And that is exactly what happened. Indeed, even those tried and sentenced in the Star Reign trial had issued denials against the İkam Newspaper. Moreover, General Mustafa Turan, one of the eyewitnesses to the 31 March incident, noted in his memoirs that the Unionists had used this uprising as a pretext for a coup specifically, to loot the palace. Everything had been planned in advance, he says. In fact, as they had agreed beforehand, Enver Pasha and Sandanski rushed straight to the treasury as soon as they entered Istanbul. Cevhera, who refused to reveal the treasury's location that day, was brutally murdered. Nadir, meanwhile, claimed he had been forced to confess under torture. Note that Hüsamettin Ertürk, the last president of the special organization, Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, also stated that the Unionists had cast a thick veil of oblivion over the immense fortune Sultan Abdulhamid had accumulated over 33 years. In fact, Hüseyin Yalçın, a Unionist journalist of the time and one of the looters of Yıldız Palace, admitted to the incident, albeit downplaying it, by suggesting that perhaps there had been only a few isolated instances of petty theft. This army of looters from Thessaloniki plundered Yıldız Palace after deposing Abdulhamid. 10 years later, Sultan Vahdettin ordered an investigation into the looting of this palace. I will read you a news article from the İkam Newspaper of that day regarding that investigation. I have the newspaper in my hand. Army Commander Mustafa Kemal Pasha, a necklace with diamonds and pearls. Major Aziz Sami, I won't read the rest. Did you see? The so-called heroes looted their own state's palace. Let me tell you the date. İkam Newspaper, issue 7/927, dated April 17, 1335, 1919. The newspaper is in my possession. Everyone, from the general down to the lieutenant, took something. The heroes who deposed Abdulhamid looted the palace like this. High school goes on longer, my friends. The Yıldız looting case eventually turned into a full-scale whitewashing operation. For with the fall of Damat Ferret, Pasha's government, and the arrival of Tevfik Pasha, who handed out favors to everyone, the enforcement of sentences began to be deliberately delayed. First, the sentences of those convicted of looting during the previous period were reduced one by one. You are currently viewing the official document related to this matter on the screen. Later, Nemrut Mustafa Pasha, the uncompromising and stern head of the case, was not only removed from his post on the grounds that he had issued unjust rulings. On top of that, he was personally seated in the defendant's chair. However, the real move was made in the High Court, specifically the Military Court of Appeals presided over by Neşet Pasha, citing legal grounds such as the General Act not constituting a crime. The court suddenly released Hazım Bey, the interior minister of that era, who had been sentenced to death as one of the case's most critical figures. The case was then returned to the Divana Harbi Urf for retrial. Ultimately, in the second trial, which concluded on January 6, 1921, the statute of limitations was intentionally invoked, resulting in the acquittal of all defendants. The Vaikkett newspaper, in its January 8, 1921 edition, announced the news to its readers with the headline, "All defendants acquitted in the Star Rain case." Thus, the Star Rain case was completely closed, never to be reopened. For behind the scenes, it had been deliberately and intentionally allowed to drag on. The process has been allowed to lapse. Many key figures were systematically removed from the records one by one. Ultimately, the very judge who had tried the looters of Yildiz Palace found himself in the defendant's chair. The mindset of rejecting our heritage, which left an indelible mark on a particular period of our history, has truly exacted a heavy toll on us. One of the symbols that fell victim to this mindset was Yildiz Palace. Most of the buildings comprising the palace complex were virtually plundered. Along with them, many works of art, objects and artifacts that could have shed light on recent history were unfortunately either burned, shattered, or sold off at auctions. The fact that the ceremonial pavilion was operated as a casino for a time in the late 1920s is one example of the reckless treatment the palace endured. The Yıldız Casinos project was implemented by the municipal authorities of the time, solely to attract tourists. We've taken a big risk and put in a lot of hard work to create these types of videos. To help them reach more people and support the growth of our channel, please don't forget to like and share our videos. See you in the next video. Peace be upon you, friends.